currently working on detailed papers on those big rocks areas that I've mentioned. They'll be out towards the end of September. In October, the end of October, our submissions on all or any of those papers close. We will have a draft report about Christmas time, one way or another, and we will have, and that will be for consultation as well, and a final report at the end of March. So it's a busy time, and I would simply encourage you all to get involved in what we're trying to make a sort of iterative process here over the next few months, and give us your feedback. We are also conscious of other activities that are occurring in the broad area. There is the classification review, which Terry will talk about in a minute. The government is required to do a review about a fourth commercial television network by the end of this year, and so we're conscious that that is in legislation and is an issue for government. There are copyright considerations, some of which are being dealt with in other forums. There is a possible parliamentary review into the media that is currently being discussed between the Greens and the government, I read. That's something that's in our understanding. And then, of course, there's the national cultural policy, which Richard will talk about in a minute. So we'll be reaching out to those processes if and when and as they happen. Just finally, in the light of all that, what are some areas that really, I think, cry out for further research in relation to media and communications and the cultural industries in which we are embedded more broadly? And some of this will reflect some of the things that Terry said, so I'll move through it fairly quickly. But just some areas that I think remain pressing areas for policy-relevant research. The imagining of the cultural industries as a sector, which is a sort of another version of Terry's point about intangibles and about naming of this sector. Despite all the work that this institute has done and that Stuart has done and that others have done, that Chas has done, I still believe that public life, the public domain in Australia does not fully understand the significance, the value, the importance of the cultural industries and the intangibles more broadly. Someone said to me the other day, why would you be surprised when we export live sheep, raw grain and iron ore, that a elaborately transforming industry like the creative industries is not widely understood in the broader Australian community. Or we're in a country where so much emphasis is on the mine, the farm, the factory, that we're having trouble in the digital age with intangibles. But we are. I don't think that dialogue is at all solved. Until it is, I think governments, business, education and most other sectors will continue to have trouble getting a handle on what we mean when we say that the creative industries will drive Australia's future, which is certainly what I believe, and perhaps many of you do too. So there's a lot more work to be done there. We have a Bureau of Agriculture and Resource Economics. The day we have a publicly funded Bureau of Cultural Industry Economics, we'll know that this problem has been solved. In the cultural areas, the siloed approach of the past, I think, remains a problem. The difficulty of having different parts of the cultural industries in different bureaucratic silos makes joined up government in this area really difficult, and yet it's crucial. Now, the current arrangement, I think, is a great improvement in that regard. If you're going to have one coordinating point, certainly for the arts, in the broad, it's best to have it in the Prime Minister's office, and it's best to have that kind of profile, and I suspect Richard would agree with that, in terms of making things happen in a coordinated way. But even so, I think we have not solved the problem yet of joining up the components of the creative industries. I see it most obvious, most difficultly in the area of Indigenous broadcasting, which until recently was in the Office of the Arts, and before that the Department of Heritage and the Arts, and the problems that caused for the magnificent work that Indigenous broadcasters around Australia are doing in terms of funders understanding the broadcasting business and so on have been massive. Now that's likely to be addressed, but it's just one example of this problem we have in joining up the cultural industries at a time when a common approach is crucial. Just very quickly, and I know I'm running short on time, the problem of heritage institutions being, this is a subset of my earlier point about the intangibles, heritage institutions being able to find their place in the firmament of funding, philanthropy and sponsorship, especially government funding, whereas intangible institutions find it very difficult. I'm involved with an organisation called Melba Recordings, whose whole purpose in life is to identify Australian musical performers, capture that in high quality digital form and distribute it globally. It has no bricks and mortar manifestations at all. It finds great difficulty in explaining to funders why that is worthwhile. Whereas if you're a company, a performing company, an institution that people walk in and out of every day, funding is kind of understood. But for an intangible organisation like Melba, it's very difficult to get people to see that it has every right to at least argue for the same kind of support that any opera company, ballet company, symphony orchestra or touring company globally should have, especially since Melba has had an enormous impact internationally in the quality of its recordings and digital offerings online in a way which has been very important for the Australian brand internationally. I don't think there's enough research on barriers to collaboration, the questions of the problems of getting what is often cottage industries in the arts and cultural industries in Australia to collaborate. How do you get people who are focused on tomorrow to think strategically about the long term when they're small business, small enterprises and struggling enterprises in themselves? The problem of government codependency, when you get to a situation where government support begins to blunt strategic clarity and courage on behalf of organisations. And the question of training and common approaches to high performance training, and this is something that I come across in my role with NIDA, the National Institute of Dramatic Art. The lack of joined-upness in the area of identifying the Australians with the most potential in arts development and then helping them find pathways. And that's an area where Minister Crean and the Department of the Arts Pathways approach, which maybe Richard will talk about, is so important and is great to see. As is indeed, and I suppose this becomes an introduction to Richard, the general view of Minister Crean about seeing the arts in its relationship to other departments, not just communications, but also education and innovation. His conception of that, I think, is very refreshing, and perhaps a way through to try and get the cultural industries onto a surer footing in terms of their future welfare. But last sentence, it seems to me for research purposes, more solution ignorant. Lots of field research is done in Australia in this area, not enough, in my view, research about where to go. Conceptual research about how to take the elements of what is and propose solutions for the future. And certainly from a Convergence Review's point of view, that's the sort of research that we like the most for obvious reasons. Thank you.
Okay, can everyone hear me fine down the back? Okay, so I'm Richard Eccles. I'm from the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, and I look after the arts and sports. I'm really pleased to be here today. Malcolm, we could talk for hours, and I think we need to at some time. I agree with everything that Malcolm said, and a few things that I'm going to talk about is maybe some of the issues that I see from my perspective that are barriers to the sort of scenario that Malcolm outlined as being ideal and, in my view, necessary for the future of arts, culture and creative industries in Australia. I'm really pleased to be talking about policy convergence because the nuts and bolts of my job is about policy convergence, and one of the benefits of being giving a presentation is you can define the term as you like and then talk to it. So for me, policy convergence is about how our policies interrelate, how they can underpin and strengthen a broader agenda, to show how various policies, when taken together, stake out and drive a broader coherent agenda. And nowhere in my mind, probably because of my job, is it so clearly able to be demonstrated than in the work program that we're confronting in the Office for the Arts, particularly as it relates to the arts and creativity agenda. And that will be a strong theme of the National Cultural Policy. So my observation and perspectives today will be coming from that perspective. It'll be broader than, but it will be encompassing the creative industries. The Office for the Arts in its current form was created in October 2010. It brought in functions primarily from the Department of Sustainability, Environment, Water, the Arts, but also a couple of functions from the Indigenous Affairs portfolio known as FAXIA, and consolidated them into the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet. And the rationale is quite simple. It's exactly as Malcolm alluded to. When you're in a central agency like the Prime Minister's Department, it's much easier to be able to see, and it is a fair bit easier, but not completely easier, to be able to influence some of the broader picture. We're in a strong position to be able to see how the arts, creativity and the cultural activities and initiatives can add weight and underpin and provide tangible progress towards broader government objectives, whether they're economic objectives, whether they're social policy objectives, whether they're diplomatic objectives. We're in a much better place to be able to see those sorts of things. Minister Crean has made it clear on a number of occasions in a number of presentations he's given that his goal is to bring the arts and the creativity agenda back to the centre of policy discussions, to position us so that when the government gives consideration on how we can advance these broader economic and social policy objectives, that arts, creativity and culture are front and centre. And to me, that is the very essence of policy convergence. But it's not straightforward at all. I really think that we need to earn the right to be considered to be in this sort of mainstream or centre position. And by this, I mean we must be in a position to be able to demonstrate and prove the role that the arts and creativity and culture can play in pursuit of the broader objectives. And I'll say this just because I'm amongst some of my closest friends and no one else will hear it, but to be absolutely blunt, we need to be pragmatic and equip ourselves with the arguments, the data, the evidence that can convince the dark knights of Treasury and the Department of Finance of the essentiality and value of our pursuits. It's no good operating in a parallel, tangential place to where they are at. We do know that the arts and creativity matters. We know that our creative industries are worth $30 billion to our GDP. We know that our creative industries have a larger contribution to the economy than agriculture, forestry, fishing, accommodation, food services. We know that nearly 350,000 people work in the industries. We know that 200,000 people volunteer. We know that the total production activity in Australia for feature films and television dramas is valued at $730 million a year. We know that we get 23 million visitors and $28 billion in tourism expenditure to the Australian economy. We know that our interactive games and entertainment industry sales are forecast to surge on a dramatic trajectory to be around $2.5 billion by 2014. And we know we're pretty good at what we do. We've got, you know, things like the National Gallery, their masterpieces exhibition attracted 476,000 visitors, with 80% of them from